Welcome everybody on this Monday afternoon to Knitting 102, where we're going to learn how to do the purl stitch, sort of the other side of the coin of the knit stitch. My name is Claire, and I'll be answering your questions in the chat here. So if you do have any questions during the course of class, please put them there. I can either answer them directly or I'll forward them to Darren. I'll also be putting the handout and the pattern in there in case you need them again. And Darren is your teacher there on screen, and I'm going to let him take it away.
Okay, welcome to class. I don't know if anyone was in the class last week. Last week we learned how to do the knit stitch, the cast on and the knit stitch, and a few other little tricks. And this week we're going to learn how to do the purl stitch. Now this is a really exciting class because the purl stitch, the knit stitch and the purl stitch, when they work together, that's almost all of knitting. Like everything you're going to learn from this point forward is based on the knit stitch and the purl stitch in some way or another. So once you master the knit stitch and the purl stitch, you're well on your way to becoming a very, very proficient knitter. And you can learn almost any of the techniques that you've seen before and been really inspired by. You're going to be ready to start trying them pretty soon. So after class is over today, we're going to go over the pattern to make this hat. So that way you'll actually be able to use what you've learned today to make a real project that you can actually use. And if you made the cowl from last week, then it makes a nice set. And you can make it and give it as a gift, or you can make them for yourself. And then next week, we're going to learn how to do these mittens. And right now where you're sitting, this seems like a really big jump. But after we are finished with this class, these mittens won't look so hard. As you can see, it's not much different than the hat, really, the shape of it. So just a few little tricks, and we can turn this hat into a mitten. And that's part of the magic of knitting. Once you learn a few more tricks, you can always do more things. There's always something new to learn. That's the exciting part. So if we want to switch the view to the view of my hands, we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so I've worked up a little swatch. The bottom of this swatch is a fabric called garter stitch. And if you work up a lot of garter stitch together, it looks like this. And you create this fabric by knitting every stitch on every row. And that's what you learned how to do last week in class. And that's how you made the cowl. So this is knitting every stitch on every row. And then the top part of this little swatch is called Stockinette Stitch. And I created that by mixing knits and purls together. So we're going to learn how to do that today as well. But first, let's learn how to do the purl stitch. So I'm going to contrast it.
Darren, your mic is a little muffled at the moment.
Better?
Yes, thank you.
So to contrast the difference between the knit and the purl stitch, for the knit stitch, you enter the stitch in this direction, you wrap your yarn, and then you're pulling that stitch back through. So, and then you transfer it over. That is the knit stitch. And we're going to do the purl stitch. So the first thing that's different with the purl stitch, you're going to take your yarn and you're going to gently place it in front.
It seems to be doing it again, Darren. I don't know what happened. It was fine at first.
Is that better?
Not really.
Let's see. Not really? Okay, is that better?
Yeah, that sounds better so far.
Okay. All right, so to start with the purl stitch, the very first step is to reposition your yarn, and you want to bring the yarn across to the front of your work. When you do the knit stitch, you work with the yarn in the back. When you do the purl stitch, you knit with the yarn, or you're going to be working with the yarn in the front. Sometimes I use the word knit for knitting and purling just because it's kind of like you're knitting, it's kind of the activity. So, but you work your yarn with your yarn in the front, and that's how you do the purl stitch. Now, the next major difference is you're going to enter your stitch in this direction. With knitting, you enter it in this direction, but for purling, you're going to dive in to the stitch and enter it this direction. So you dive into the stitch, and you make the X, and then you can put everything in your left hand. And now my right hand is available to do other things. And I'm going to use my right hand to wrap my needle. And then this motion is more like you're pushing that loop through. So you're pushing that loop through, and then you transfer it over. Now I'm going to show you this several times. So let me see if I can get up close to the camera so you have a really clear view. You want to enter the stitch. So you're diving in the stitch this direction. My yarn is still in the front. So you wrap your yarn the same way you do with knitting. So that's very important. You wrap your yarn in the same direction as you do when you make the knit stitch. And then you push that stitch, that loop back through, and then you transfer it over. Okay. How does that look? Does that look like fun? So here's a little rhyme that you can use to remember. You go under the fence, you grab a sheep, back we go, and off we leap. So that's a little rhyme to help you remember. Or Jack goes in the back door, puts on a scarf, goes back outside, then jumps off. So fun little rhymes, but just remember, it's just 4 easy steps. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, do we have any questions? Is there any particular step that maybe is confusing, or do you want me to kind of spotlight any particular step, or are you pretty good?
We'll wait a little bit. I don't see any questions coming in about the purl specifically. We did have a couple questions on how to review how to do the cast on.
Okay, so.
Here come the questions. Okay. Yes, so a couple questions to review the cast on. Nancy wants to know, do you have to have the first row done first?
No, you don't have to have the first row done first. I just had this little swatch started. I cast on 12, and I just knitted the little swatch just so that you would be able to see the different types of fabric that we're going to be covering. But once you cast on, you can just like start with a purl row or start with a knit row, whatever you want. Claire, do you think we have time to review the cast on? We've got a lot to cover.
I would say we've got a couple other questions to get through first here.
Okay.
A good question from Don is, can you wrap the yarn either way on the needle?
Absolutely not. That is a big no. If you wrap it the wrong way, you will end up getting twisted stitches. And that's not the end of the world, but it will show up as a different texture on your work. It will make your stitches tighter. And it's just like a really bad habit to get into. So make sure, when I first started knitting, I wrapped my yarn the wrong way for knitting and purling for like 2 years before, because I taught myself before I knew how to do it the right way. And everything was fine. But now that I know how to do it the right way, things are better. Okay.
And a question from Elizabeth about how to bring the yarn up front so that it stays, or how you hold the yarn so it stays in front there.
Stays in front. Okay, so I'm starting my second row. So position your yarn in the front. So you just position it there. Dive into the stitch, wrap the yarn, and then push it through. And now the yarn should stay in the front unless if you reposition it in the back, because it's not going to be able to fall to the back because it's kind of attached right here. So it should just kind of naturally stay in the front. But if it doesn't for some reason, just kind of hold it there. You could hold it here and hold it kind of with your thumb here, but you don't want to get in the habit of like holding it too tense. So just make sure it's like it should just lay nicely there. And then you can make as many pearls as you need to. So are we actually making pearls? Any success out there?
Oh my God.
Possibly yes. Oh, we've got a few mixed bag answers here. We do have a question for someone who is knitting. They're holding the yarn in their left hand, like continental style, and so they're holding the needles in their right hand. So could you show that?
Yep. Okay, so I've been kind of going back and forth a little bit. I naturally hold my yarn in my left hand. So when I'm teaching, I try to hold it in my right hand because that's possibly the more common way. But if you want to hold it in your left hand, this is called continental knitting. And this is how they knit on the European continent. So you're holding it like this. You dive into the stitch, you wrap it around, and then you push it back through. Now, I don't knit like this on a regular basis or purl like this, so I don't do it very graceful. Or you can either wrap the yarn around it, or you can wrap the needle. So you can wrap the yarn, or you can pick it up with the needle, whichever is easiest. So you tension your yarn like this, enter the stitch, you pick it up with the needle, like that. Does that? And then the other way, the British way, or what you'll hear this either called British, sometimes called Western knitting as well. So make sure your yarn's in the right place, enter the stitch, and then you wrap it with your right hand. And there are many ways of doing this. I don't knit like this either, so it doesn't look very graceful when I do this either. Sometimes you can just kind of hold it and kind of get in the habit of flicking your finger around it, which I cannot do. But there are, just so you know, there are many, many ways of knitting and holding your yarn and your needles. So any other questions? Does that answer that question?
I think so. And for everybody in the chat, just a reminder that this class is being recorded. So if you need to catch up after class, it'll be posted in about 24 hours on michaels.com/classes. And that's also where you can find last week's lesson as well, if you need to review the cast on.
Okay. So the way I knit and purl, it's kind of a combination of the two. And then I wrap it with my left hand. So this is how I do it in my real life, which I don't think this is an official way. I've met other knitters that do this, but it's kind of I always say this is the way weirdos knit. Is this a real way, Claire, to people? Is there a name for this way?
I'm sure someone has invented a name somewhere, but I don't know it right now.
Let's go with the weirdo. This is the weirdo way. This is the way weirdos knit. Okay. So just so you know, though, there are many, many, many different ways of holding your yarn, holding your needles. But as long as you're following the same rules, you're entering the stitch the correct way, you're wrapping the yarn the correct way, and then you're pushing it back through and taking it off, you're going to get a knit stitch. Now, so now that I said that you have to do everything the exact way I'm doing it to get, a purl stitch, I've said you have to do it exactly the way I'm doing it to get a purl stitch, but there are other ways. I'm going to tell you, just for your own independent learning, if you want to research later, there's a purl stitch called the Norwegian purl, and you do it in a complete different way, and you end up with the same stitch. We're not going to do that today, but just I like to give people knowledge for independent learning that you can research further. So I think with knitting, the main rule with knitting is that there are always exceptions to every rule. Okay, we feel pretty good about the purl.
think we'd like to see at least one more row, especially how to start the row.
So when you start and you want to take your time when you start the row, there's no rush, right? We're just knitting for relaxation. So you're going to take it a minute and look at what you're doing. Go ahead and make sure that your your stitch isn't twisted. So make sure everything's lined up really nice, double check. And then take your yarn and just gently lay it on the side. You're not trying to pull it tight. So just gently lay it on the side. You can hold it with your thumb if you want to. And you dive into the stitch. Wrap your yarn and then push it back through. And then you can hold on to the yarn. You don't have to let it drop, and that will keep it in the back where it needs to be.
Can you angle it slightly differently when you wrap the yarn there and your hand comes up and totally covers it?
Sorry.
And on this stitch, we do have a question about how you're pushing that loop through.
You just make sure you can snug it up a little bit around your needle so it kind of sticks there. Push a lot of needle through so you're not working on the very tip. It won't slip off. And so you just wrap it around, hold it there kind of snug, and then basically just take your needle back through and it'll bring that loop right with it. So see how I'm giving a lot of needle here. I'm not just using the tip. Wrap the yarn. You don't want to pull it tight, but make sure it's a bit snug, and then go back through, and that will naturally pull it right. It'll bring it right with it. So look, you won't normally look at it from this angle, but when you bring it through, you can see how it brings that loop with it.
And Gabrielle has a good question, actually, or Gabrielle, sorry. She says, or they say, there still looks like the regular knit stitch that we did last week. Like their fabric looks the same as we did last week with all knit stitches.
Okay, perfect. That is a very good observation. And we are going to talk about that after this row and what that means and how we can use that to our advantage. Okay. So put it on the front. So as you can see, mine does too. This is knitting every row. Every stitch on every row was knitted. Here, I did a knit stitch and then a purl stitch and then a knit stitch and then a purl stitch. So I alternated between them. So I knitted one whole row, I turned my work, and then I purled one whole row. And when I started demonstrating for class, I've just been doing purls. So all these rows were purled and they look exactly like when I did all knits. So this is something that we need to learn and kind of understand. And this is the secret life of the knit stitch. So the secret about the knit stitch and the purl stitch is they are exactly the same stitch. You are just creating the front of one stitch and then you're creating the back of the other stitch. And we're never really sure which is the front or the back. It just depends on which side of your fabric is going to be the right side for your project. So let me show you how to tell the difference between a knit and a purl is the first thing we're going to learn. So I've isolated one stitch here with this needle. And if you kind of pinch the bottom of it a little bit, you can see it's shaped like a V. And as you're taking knitting classes, you're going to hear people talking about this V. And that's what we're talking about. So it's shaped like a V. That's the knit stitch. And then the purl stitch on the back is, first of all, it's not shaped like a V. So that's your first clue. So like none of these are shaped like Vs. So that must be the purl stitch. But the Purl Stitch also, it has a lot more texture, and it looks like the fabric is running in horizontal stripes, right? And then you're getting these bumps. So if you look up here on your needle, these are the Purl stitches I just made. And the Purl stitch is right there. So it kind of looks like that little bump. It looks like a little bead, kind of. And maybe when people first started knitting and purling and they were using white wool right from the sheep, maybe that looked like a purl to them, that little bump. And maybe that's why it's called a purl, but it is spelled different, but you know, who knows how it was named purl. So let's look at this side. So if you're going to look right on the edge of your needle, and this is what you're going to need to know, you're going to need to be able to read your knitting so you know where to start. So if you look right here on the very edge where your needle is, you're going to see this V shape, and that's the knit stitch. So you're going to see right here, it's shaped like a V. The knit stitch also, basically, it's not really touching your needle. It's hanging down below your needle, and it's a very long stitch. So it looks much longer. And so here's the next one. Here's our second one. It's shaped like a V. It's hanging below the needle. So that is a knit stitch. That's how you can tell right on your needle. And then if you look here, the Purl stitch, you can see how it's bumped up tight against the needle. So it's touching the needle. It's bumped up tight against that needle. And it's a very short little bump. It's not hanging down. So that's a Purl stitch. Now, if you noticed what happened, I showed you that these were Purl stitches, and I turned it over, and just like magic, those same stitches turned into knit stitches, right? So you have to remember, whenever you're creating a knit stitch on the front of your work, you are putting a Purl stitch on the back of your work at the same time. So instead of just thinking about the side that you're working on, you have to remember, I'm creating this side and I'm creating this side all at the same time. So whatever I do in this row here is going to show up on the other side. It's, if you think of it like a coin has heads and tails. So the knit stitch has the knit and the purl. So it's one side of the coin is the knit and one side is the purl. So it looks different from the front and back. So you look different from the front and the back, and so does the knit stitch. It wants to be like everybody else, and it looks different from the front and the back. So does that make any sense at all, or was it completely confusing? So if you do all knit stitches, you're going to get garter stitch. And if you do all purl stitches, you're going to get garter stitch. And then the way we get different fabrics is by working knits and purls together in the same row. Okay, makes sense? When I first started knitting, I taught myself how to knit, and none of this made any sense. I couldn't figure out why knits were where they were and why purls were where they were, and it didn't make any sense. But I try to explain it. And when you're looking at a stitch, it doesn't matter if I was knitting or purling when I made these stitches. What matters is when I'm looking at them on my work, what are they? So this is a knit stitch, and I may have made that stitch when I was on the purl side, but it doesn't matter because when I'm looking at it, it's a purl, and when I'm looking at this, it's a knit. Okay. Any questions about how, do we understand how to tell the difference? Because that's going to be very important later on. Okay, look
Seems
for
like
the
everybody
V
got
shape.
that explanation.
Okay, good.
We did have a follow-up question on how to get a fabric with all the knits on the same side. So like
Okay,
what
perfect.
you've been demonstrating down there.
Perfect. That's exactly what I'm going to show right now. Okay. So I just finished a purl row. So I did this row, I created purls. And so when I turned my work over, just like magic, those purl stitches have now turned into knit stitches. And so let's just say I was making a scarf and the scarf was having me switch between stockinette stitch and garter stitch. And like I laid this down and I went and had a snack and then I came back and I'm not sure, like, what am I supposed to be doing? So what you want to do to identify where you are is you want to look up here at the stitches that are right against your needle. And because these stitches are hanging below the needle and they're V-shaped, I know they're knit stitches. So I'm going to work stockinette stitch. I'm going to put all my knits on the same side. I'm looking at knit stitches, so that means I'm going to knit. So I'm going to quickly knit through this row, and then we'll look at the next row. Any questions while I'm knitting?
We do have a question, but I'm not exactly sure what she's trying to ask, or they're trying to ask.
We'll give it our best try.
Why does my stitches look different from each end? And I don't know if they're referring to the stitches on the very end of the row, or like you were just saying, that it looks different on one side of the fabric versus the other,
Okay.
which is how it should look. So if
Which is
it's
how it
looking
should
like
look.
that, you're good.
Okay, I'm at the end of my, just knit the same stitch, the last stitch the same way we've been working. Okay, so this is the row I've just finished, and you can see it doesn't look like garter stitch. So that's how. And now I'm going to turn my work over, and those knits that I just created knits, you saw me do it. You saw they were knits. And on this side, I'm going to stop and look at my work and see where I am. These are purl stitches. So I'm looking at the stitches that are right up on my needle. So this is the row I'm working on. And because these stitches look like little bumps and they're bumped up tight against my needle, I can identify them as purls. And then the other way to identify them is they're not shaped like V's. So that means they must be a purl, because if they were shaped like V's, they'd be knits. So but that's what I'm looking for, is this bump right here. I'm not sure, hopefully you can see it on the video. So right there. So I'm working stockinette stitch. I'm looking at a row of purls. So I have to purl to maintain my stockinette stitch. So I'm going to dive into the stitch, wrap it, and push it through. I'm going to do the whole row as a row of purls. So as I'm purling, are there any questions?
We do have one. Jessie wants to know if you're doing a purl row and say in the middle of it, you forgot and do a couple of knit stitches by mistake, how would you go back to correct the stitches?
Well, at this point in your knitting career, it's a bit of a challenge. And next week, we're going to have knitting 3. And then the week after, we're going to have knitting 4, which we're going to go into great detail on how to do that. But quickly, we can't get hung up on this and we won't cover everything. But let's just say I laid my work down and I got confused and I did 2 knit stitches. And now I realized that, oh shoot, I should have been. So you don't want to let these unravel. So if I take this off my needle, it's going to unravel. So here's the stitch, and then here's the stitch below it. So this is the daughter, and this is the mother. That's how you look at it. And so if you kind of stretch it, you see how it opens up, and you put your needle right through there and take it off. Or you can very carefully, you want to hold it here very carefully, take your needle out. As I'm holding it very carefully, you don't want it to unravel, and then pop that back on. But we are going to cover this in a very detailed way in knitting 4.
We had another good question from Tristan. They say, if a pattern says six rows of stockinette, is that 6 rows of knit and purl alternated, or is it 12 rows of knit and purl, 6 knit, 6 purl?
Okay, so that's a very good question. So if it says to knit 6 rows of stockinette stitch, each time you knit a row, it counts as a row. So I just did a purl row. I knitted a purl row. That counts as a row. So that's 1 row. and I turn it over, I'm knitting a knit row, that will count as another row. So every time you finish a row, you get full credit for that row and it counts, okay? And I'm going to show you how to count your rows. So we talked about looking for these V shapes. So we're going to look at these and we count them in this direction. So I have 1, 2, 3. And when I count them, I kind of put my point, whatever I'm using to point with. Sometimes it's easier if you use a needle or something to point with to keep your place. I always put my needle right in the center. So 1, 2, 3, and then that kind of keeps you in the same line. All right. Any other questions? And so now I'm knitting a knit row, and this counts as a row. You get full credit for this row as well.
When you get to your next purl row, Kelly has a question. When you put the needle up, it goes to the front. Does it matter if the needle goes to the back?
Let's get there and we'll look at it. I'm not sure I understand the question though, but we'll see what we can do. Okay. So, and after you finish a row, it's a good idea to just kind of stop for a second as we're learning. Look at what you've just done. Make sure it looks nice. It's not a bad idea to count your stitches and make sure you didn't add or lose a stitch by mistake. So, take your time and look at what you've done. And once you're sure it looks good, because sometimes, let's say you made a big mistake over here. If you look at it right now, you might remember, oh yeah, there was that weird thing there, something, I remember that happened, and you'll kind of be able to remember what happened and maybe not do it again the next time. But if you don't realize it and you look down here and something happened, you might not be able to remember. It might not be such a good learning experience because you've already forgot what that was like when you made the mistake way down here. So if you can catch your mistake in the same row, then you'll remember like maybe how you made that mistake and you can learn from that. Okay, so I finished my knit row, turn my work, kind of position everything, bring my yarn to the front. Now, what was the question?
When you're purling, you put your needle in and it stays to the front. What happens if it goes to the back?
Okay, so if it goes to the back, and let me just go ahead and do the purl. You can see it kind of wraps it around. It's not going to give you a nice clean stitch. So if I enter the stitch and put it in the back and I'm wrapping it, then the yarn's it's stretching this stitch and it's not going to work out. It's very hard to do actually. So I've never tried that before, but you want to make sure you keep it in the front, and that's going to give you a nicely shaped stitch. You're not going to stretch out the other stitch, and it's going to be much easier to do. What do you think, Claire?
Yeah, I would say keep your working needle on top and towards the front.
Yeah. I mean, if this is your favorite thing in the world to do, I mean, go ahead, you can live your life, but you're making things super hard. Yeah, keep it right here, and that's going to make things very easy. Okay, how do we feel about stockinette stitch?
I think we're feeling pretty good here, and we're a little more than halfway through class.
Okay. All right. Finish this row. Okay. Talk about a few things, and then we're going to learn how to make ribbing. So we're going to learn, after this class, we'll know how to do 3 types of fabric. We'll be able to do garter stitch, stockinette stitch, and ribbing. And that's just 3 choices. Once you master the purl, it's basically unlimited, the number of textures that you can get. Okay, so this is stockinette stitch. And then this is a swatch that I knitted out of stockinette stitch. And this is kind of a hard lesson you have to learn. if you make a people love to make a stockinette stitch scarf because stockinette stitch is so pretty. And if you make a stockinette stitch scarf where you do all stockinette stitch, look how it's just going to roll up like that. Or it's going to roll like this. So you're going to make your scarf and you're going to put it on, and instead of being this wide, it's going to roll up and be this wide. And maybe that's what you want. I mean, maybe that's the look you were going for. And if that's the look you're going for, then perfect. But if you wanted your scarf to be, you know, wider, like a more traditional scarf, then you're going to be disappointed. So make sure you do not make stockinette stitch scarves because you'll probably be disappointed. I'm going to show you can do a garter stitch or you can do ribbing, but this one will always curl. And the only way to make it not curl is if you staple it to the wall. If you lay it out and you staple it to the wall, it won't curl. But then when you take the staples out, it's going to curl back up. So, you know, it just depends on what you're making and what you're going to use it for. So that is, you've probably had sweaters that had like a rolled sleeve. That's how you achieve that rolled sleeve. And if that's what you're, you know, if you want a rolled sleeve on your sweater, it's super cute, but you just make sure that's what you wanted and that's what you're planning for. And you want to know why is it happening? So stockinette stitch just automatically always rolls. Okay. So now we're going to look at how to make ribbing, where we're using knits and purls in the same row to create a new fabric. So I'm going to start out with knits. I'm going to do 2 knits. Okay, and now I have to switch to the purl stitch. And what we know about the purl stitch is that the yarn has to be in the front. So we have to bring our yarn to the front. And so you're going to do your 2 knits. You're going to come to a full stop, open your needles, and you're going to bring that yarn in between the needles. And now that my yarn's in the front, I can do as many purl stitches as I need. So I'm going to do 2. So what I'm doing, I'm working a knit 2, purl 2, rib. And ribbing can be any combination of knits and purls like that. It's usually like the same number of each, but not always. It could be knit 1, purl 1. It could be knit 3, purl 3. It could be knit 4, purl 3. It could be any number of things. So, so I did my 2 purls, come to a full stop, open up your needles, and you want to go through the needles. So it's like you're scoring a goal, right? You're going to go through and make a field goal. If you go around this way, then you don't get a goal because you didn't go the right way. And if you go this way, you don't get your point because the goal, you know, you went around the goal. You have to go in between the goal, and that will give you your, how many points do you get for a field goal, Claire? I don't even know.
You are asking the wrong person here. Maybe 2.
Let's go with 2 points because we always want to get at least 1 extra point. So
We have a sports person in the chat who says 3.
3 points it is. I'm not going to
Thank you,
argue.
sports people.
Not going to argue. So I did my 2 knits, come to a full stop. You're going to make the goal. And now I can do as many purls. If the pattern said do 10 purls, do 1 purl, whatever, you can do as many as you want because it's in the right position. Now I'm going to show you what happens. A lot of times people will make this mistake, and it's a very common mistake. I'm not paying attention, right? I'm watching television, or I'm chatting, or maybe I had a glass of wine. You don't never know what's going on. And instead of being careful, I went like this maybe, and I just missed it, and I'm not paying attention. But if you look what happens, that yarn is around my needle. And so it doesn't just like, there is a reason why you have to go in the middle. You don't want, anytime the yarn is around your needle, you have the opportunity to make a new stitch. And later on, we're going to learn that this is a real stitch called a yarn over. And what a yarn over does, it puts a hole in your work, like if you're making lace or buttonholes, and it adds an extra stitch. So it can come in really handy, but if you're doing ribbing, it's going to ruin everything. So I'm going to do my 2 knits. Now let's stop and see what happened. So first of all, that happened. There's going to be a big hole in my work. And now the next problem is I had 12 stitches because I was going to knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, and then there's the wrong one, knit 2, ending with purl 2. So a knit 2, purl 2 rib is a repeat. So I'm repeating 4 stitches. I'm doing knit 2, purl 2, end of my repeat. So it's a 4-stitch repeat. And I'm going to repeat those 4 stitches as many times as I want to. So if you want to do a knit 2, purl 2 rib, you want to make sure you cast on a number that's divisible by 4. If you're doing a knit 1, purl 1 rib, then any even number will do. But what I've done is I've added this extra stitch. So when I come back across, I'm going to end up getting off track because this stitch is going to throw off my repeat. So I'm going to take that out. So just especially as you're learning, make sure you always watch and make sure it goes all the way through. Full stop, open your needles, bring it through. Okay, so now I'm going to lay this down. I'm going to go have a snack, or maybe I'm going to go to bed and start this in the morning. When I start my next row, I don't remember what I was doing. So let's look at it. So here are 2 knits. They're kind of staring at me right up front. So I've got 2 knits, and then these are 2 purls, and then these are 2 knits. So I'm working on ribbing because I'm alternating. So if these are 2 purls, this end stitch, they must be 2 knits because knit 2, purl 2 is what we're doing. Sometimes this end stitch can be really hard to see because it's kind of gets stretched out of shape. So it's not a bad idea to kind of come in a couple of stitches and start identifying stitches here. So these are 2 knits, 2 purls. These must be 2 knits. That looks like a knit, and this one's kind of confusing, but we're going to go with knit. And so that's how you kind of read your knitting and kind of keep track where you are in the pattern. Any questions about that? Questions?
While we wait for questions to come in, I'll put the pattern here in the chat in case anybody needs that, because we've got about 15 minutes left. Okay, here we go. Kelly wants to know, do you turn the work after each row?
Yes. So after each row, when you run out of stitches, you're going to turn your work because there's nothing left to do, right? So I'm going to finish this row.
And then a couple questions about starting a row. Robin wants to know, do you start the next row with the same stitch? And we have another question. You start your new row with the opposite stitch. So we have two questions on the same thing.
Okay, so I just finished my row and I don't have any stitches in my left hand. So I'm going to have to turn my work. I'm going to have to change hands. So I'm going to have to work on the other side. So turn my work because I don't have any more stitches to work with. And you don't necessarily want to think about what I did over here and when I turn it, should I start with the same stitch or the opposite stitch? What you want to look at is, because you might lay this down and not come back to it for 6 months. I mean, that's not an uncommon thing. And you're not going to remember what you did over here. But the good news is you don't have to remember because you can look and see these are purl stitches. These are 2 purl stitches. And when you turn your work to start, you're going to see these here and be like, these are 2 knit stitches. So you're going to, as we're doing ribbing, so what's happening is we're stacking our knit stitches on top of each other. and we're stacking our purl stitches on top of each other. So you end up with columns of knits and purls that are stacked up on top of each other. So whenever I see knit stitches, if I'm going to continue in ribbing, then I'm going to knit the knit stitches that I'm looking at. So I'm looking at knit stitches, and I'm going to start the row with 2 knit stitches. Now you might be working a pattern where instead of knit 2, purl 2, you're starting with purls for some reason. It could be purl 2, knit 2. And so then that would be, you know, you look at the stitch and make the decision, what stitch is it? And that's the stitch you're going to do. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, I think so. Essentially, it really depends on how many stitches are in your repeat and if you have a full or a partial repeat anywhere in the row.
Okay, so when do we use ribbing anyway? So ribbing, the reason we like to use ribbing is because you can see here on this sweater sleeve and on this mitten that it goes in this way. It's almost like elastic. So it squeezes in and makes it a little tight. So when you put this mitten on, it's going to stay in place. And when you push your sleeve up, it's going to stay pushed up. So you want that little extra tight. It's almost like elastic. Sometimes they'll even have you knit the ribbing on a smaller needle and then change, when you start stockinette stitch, change to a larger needle. So read your pattern carefully. And this sweater was done in a knit 1, purl 1 rib. And so you don't even see the purls. If you're not watching very closely, you might think it's just all stockinette stitch. But if you stretch it a bit, you're going to see those purl stitches right inside. All right, so that's when you, and if you look at your sweaters, usually you have ribbing around the neck and around the sleeves and around the bottom. And for a hat, you would have ribbing right at the edge. And so why is that? Because if you don't have ribbing, you're going to end up with a hat with the rolled edge. And again, that I've seen those hats. I've made hats like that. Super cute hat. But you want to make sure that's, first of all, that's the look you wanted. And second of all, why does this happen? You know, you want to make sure you understand what's happening. You don't want to be just knitting along blind and hoping for the best. So if you want a rolled edge, you use stockinette stitch. And if you want a more traditional edge with ribbing that's going to lay flat and squeeze in a bit, then you'll use ribbing. So any questions about the different types of fabric, how to make them, and the purposes of them? So these 2 swatches are the same number of stitches and the same number of rows. So you can see the garter stitch, it kind of pulls down this way. If you let it relax, the purl rows kind of bump together. But if you open it up, you can see there's a row of knits in between the purls. And so garter stitch ends up being a little shorter, but look how nice and wide it is, and it lays flat. Now the stockinette stitch, all of the knits are stacked up on top of each other so you can see all of them, but it's going to curl up like this. So this is the difference in the 2 types of fabric that you would make, just to kind of help you understand what's happening. And then this one, of course, is reversible. And this one, this is stockinette stitch. And this side is called reverse stockinette stitch. So it's just the back. It's just the back of stockinette stitch. I've had sweaters where this has been the front. This has been like what's on the outside of the sweater. But usually you're going to see this on the outside of your sweaters. Okay. Any questions at all? Anything about anything we've covered today?
We do have a question going back to the Purl Stitch about how you wrap your yarn. Joe wants to know, was it from the front or from the back of the needle?
Okay, so I'm going to deviate from my ribbing. I'm just going to do a couple purl stitches just for demonstration purposes. So my yarn's in the front, so I'm going to do a purl. You dive into the stitch. I'm going to wrap it this way. So it's kind of counterclockwise. If these are the hands of a clock, it's 3 o'clock. You put your yarn here at the 3, 3, 2, 1, blast off. So you're going back in time, and then you're going under that needle, because if you go across the top of the needle, you get nothing. But if you go counterclockwise and go under that needle, then you get it wrapped around the needle and make your stitch. And then if you really focus on that, pretty soon you won't have to count it out like that each time. You'll be like, okay, 3, you're going to bring it that way. Okay, does that help? Was that the question?
Yes, that was the question, yes. And we are under 10 minutes now, so I want to make sure we get to the hat pattern here.
Let's change gears and we'll get to the hat pattern. Teacher's notes out of the way. Okay. So if you want to make ribbing tighter, like we talked about, you can use a smaller needle. And we're going to review here. So this one is telling us the materials. We need Heartland Thick and Quick yarn in redwood. So I did not want to use that. So you don't always have to do what you're told. I don't like to do what I'm told. So sometimes I'll listen to suggestions and sometimes I won't. So the yarn that I ended up using for this hat and for the class is Hometown Bonus Bundle. And this is available on lionbrand.com or on michaels.com. It's a very nice yarn, 100% acrylic, easy to work with. It comes in a lot of really great colors. And the reason I changed the yarn was to kind of give a teaching moment. You can change yarns for patterns if you want to, but what you need to make sure you do is understand the differences between the yarn. So I'm very familiar with Heartland Thick and Quick. I know it's a number 5 yarn, but it's a very thick and chunky number 5. So it's very similar to the Hometown. It's not much smaller at all. So knowing that, I can change my yarn. I wouldn't want to use, instead of this yarn, you wouldn't want to use like a sock yarn or a number 3 yarn, because then you're going to have a lot of problems. So you get your yarn. This one's calling for a knitting needle size 11. I used a size 13, but you could knit this yarn on a size 11 and it would just be a little more dense. And then you need a large-eyed blunt needle for weaving in your ends and seaming. Okay, so for the hat, you're going to cast on 50 stitches. So that's easy. Row 1, there's an asterisk. So whenever you see an asterisk, that usually means you're going to repeat something, but it always means pay extra attention. Something's going to happen. So you're going to knit 2 and then purl 2. Repeat from the asterisk to the last 2 stitches, and the last 2 stitches are knit 2. So in this situation, we're starting with knit 2 and we're ending with knit 2. So there's always a different situation. You need to make sure you're paying attention. Row number 2, you're going to purl 2 and you're going to knit 2. You're going to repeat from the asterisk to the last 2 stitches, ending with a purl 2. And so that's working ribbing. And it's telling us to repeat rows 1 and 2 until the piece measures about 2 inches from the cast on edge. So you would measure that from this very edge. So people sometimes want to know if the cast on edge counts. In this situation, it does count because you'll be measuring it right from here. I thought I had a tape measure handy. Apparently I don't have one. But you'll put your tape measure right along the very edge of the hat and you'll be measuring. And you can make a longer ribbing if you want to, or you can just do what the pattern says. On this hat, you can see I made the ribbing quite a bit longer because I just wanted some extra ribbing. So you can do whatever you want. I always like to encourage people to kind of branch out a little bit. The next row, after you've worked your ribbing and it measures 2 inches, the next row you're going to knit, and the next row you're going to purl. That sounds like Stockinette Stitch, right? We know how to do that. We can work Stockinette Stitch, knit 1 row and purl 1 row, until the hat measures about 9 inches from the cast on edge. So again, it's from the cast on edge. The temptation might be measure it from here because you're thinking you just want to measure your stockinette stitch. But what it's telling us is to measure it from the cast on edge, meaning the very, very edge of your hat. Now, that being said, maybe you want a slouchy hat, or maybe you want a really long hat for some kind of a costume or something. You could keep knitting until it was like 25 or 30 inches. You know, you can keep going, it's fine. But to make the hat in the picture, you would go about 9 inches from the edge. If you went like 10 or 12, it would just make it more slouchy. So you're going to cut the yarn, leaving a 20-inch long tail. So I have a sample here that I've knitted up. So you're going to cut the yarn and you're going to leave a 20-inch long tail. And the reason you're leaving such a long tail is because we're going to use that tail for seaming. A different color yarn to demonstrate my seaming. And if you use that same tail for seaming, then you'll have less ends to weave in. Okay. So pretend this is my end. So it's a different color because I want you to be able to see clearly what I'm doing. Okay, but this would be the same as this tail. It would be the same. So don't let that confuse you. Okay, so I'm going to put my stitches at the end of my needle like I'm going to work them. And you take the 20-inch long tail, you put it on a large eye blunt needle, and we're going to go back through each one of these stitches and put them on that tail. And you can do them one at a time, or you can do them 2 at a time, or you can kind of do a whole bunch at a time. You know, whatever you want to do, just don't miss any, don't let any drop off, and then don't unthread your needle. You can help it. So if I'm doing this, I'll probably just do like 1 or 2 at a time and try to make it quick. Okay, so as I'm transferring these over, do you have any questions about what's going on? Because it does take a minute.
We did have a couple questions about how you would fit the 50 stitches on needles for the hat. And I can see that you used a circular needle there, so you can demonstrate.
Well, yes. So you can use the regular straight needles that you have, and you will fit them on. You just kind of have to jam them on a little bit. They'll be kind of bunched up on there. Knitting needles, the straight needles come in like 14 inches or what are they usually, 9 inches or 12, something like that. And you can make a hat on them and just kind of jam all the stitches on. But what I have here is a circular needle, and let me transfer all my stitches and I'll show it to you. Circular needles are also used for knitting in the round. So if you want to knit a tube, you can use circular needles, or you can knit flat on them. Okay, so here is my circular needle. And you can see I've got 2 small knitting needles, but they're connected by this wire. And that gives you plenty of room to put as many stitches. I could do a baby blanket on these. So different choices. There's always different choices when it comes to knitting. So once you put all of your stitches on here, you just want to pull it through, and you're going to cinch this up really tight. So you're going to cinch it up really tight because this is the top of your hat. And mine isn't going to work so well because I'm not using my tail. So after you cinch it up really tight, you're going to want to go through 2 stitches, 1 or 2 stitches here on the end, and pull that really tight. And just to kind of lock it in place, you know, you might want to go through that stitch one more time to just kind of lock it in place, so that you don't want this hole to open up later. So just pull it really tight, and it should be pulled really snug. Now I'm going to show you a seaming technique, and this seaming technique is called mattress stitch. Just as fast as we can, so it looks like we're a minute over. So we learned how to tell the difference between a knit and a purl. So we're going to identify our knit stitches. So this one stitch always kind of curls. So this is what we're looking for, this stitch that's curling on the end. So this, and we're looking at them upside down. But so this is kind of an upside down V because we're looking at an opposite direction we knitted it. So if you pull these apart, you can see it has these rungs of a ladder that are in between. That's what we're going to be looking for. So we're going to look along this edge. You wouldn't want to do this because you end up stretching out your fabric, but I'm doing this for demonstration purposes. You're going to take your needle and you're going to pick up the rung of that ladder. And then you're going to go to this side. And the easy way to look for this is you're just looking at 2 strands of yarn. That's 1 stitch. So I'm going to go under that rung of that ladder. And once you get started, it's pretty easy because I can see my other stitch was there. I'm just going to go to the one right above it. And there are more in-depth videos on YouTube. If you just search mattress stitch, it will give you videos that aren't quite so rushed, but we're running out of time. So you just find, you're going to pick up, see there's 2 strands of yarn here. You're going to find this rung of the ladder. You're going to pick it up. Same thing over here. This is where my previous one was. So I'm going to go under the rung of that ladder. Can you see where I'm getting that from? Under that bar that's sometimes they're called a bar in between. So this is where my previous one was. So I'm just going to go right under it. And you might be thinking that looks awful. That is not a good seam. But you say a magic word secretly in your head, abracadabra, and you pull that tight, and look what happens. It's a beautiful seam. And even with this different color yarn, it still makes a very nice seam. And you work this seam with wrong sides together. So you're working from the right side because you have to find these knit stitches. Now, if that looks too complicated, then you can just simply whip stitch it together. And again, you only want to pick up 2 strands of yarn along the edge. And you're just going to space them out nice and evenly, and you're not going to go too deep. So if you're just picking up 2 strands and then picking up 2 strands on this side, then you're going to keep your stitches nice and even. Okay, any questions? I think we're pretty much out of time. I always run over.
Everyone was suitably impressed by your magic seam there.
You know what? And then the magic seam, that mattress stitch, it looks so impressive and it looks super hard, but I promise you, if you practice it just a little bit, it's very, very easy. And it works so beautifully with Stockinette Stitch. It doesn't work as easy with some other stitches, but Stockinette Stitch, easy, beautiful. Okay. So any other questions at all quickly? So if you do run into questions as you're practicing, you can send me a direct message on Instagram or TikTok. And my Instagram and TikTok screen names are, it's the same one, it's Mr. Woolly Bear. So you spell out Mr. M-I-S-T-E-R, and then Woolly Bear. So Mr. Woolly Bear spelled out. And then on Facebook, if you want to send me a direct message, you can just, it's just my name spelled out like normal. So, and I always try to answer as quick as I can. I can usually help people through, simple problems or answer questions about the pattern or yarn choices. So just let me know if you need any help at all. Next week, we are going to make this mitten. And again, don't let this intimidate you because you already know how to knit and purl. You know how to make ribbing and stockinette stitch because you made this hat. And if you look at this hat and this mitten, they're practically the same thing. We just have to learn how to make increases and decreases. And we'll make this thumb with increases and then we'll decrease to bring this down to a nice point. But not much different than the hat, really, in the grand scheme of things. All right. So thanks for coming to class. Don't forget to practice. It's all about practice.